What's up, everybody? Justin Morgan here with my boy Fraser Bayley, and we
What's
are
going on?
talking about training, nutrition. We're talking about all kinds of stuff, all things strength and all that kind of thing. Fraser owns a company called Evolving Alpha, which was formerly Plant Strong Fitness, as I understand it.
Yeah.
There's also a Facebook group associated with that. It's one of my personal favorite Facebook groups, one of the only like really good, in my opinion, really good plant-based vegan kind of Facebook pages on the net where there's not, it's really well moderated. There's not a lot of crazy people, and I just really appreciate the work they do. So, Fraser, why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about your company, about what you guys do, what kind of services you offer, and that kind of thing, just so they get an idea of who you are and what you do.
Okay, cool. So we, like you said, originally were Plant Strong Fitness. The reason why we just changed the name was for, trademark reasons with Rip Esselstyn's Engine 2 stuff. When I created the group, I didn't even really know about his stuff, and it was a couple of years ago, and I just wanted a place, like you were saying, where we could just more than anything just control the conversations that people were having and make sure they were productive. And then we rebranded to Evolving Alpha. We do online vegan nutrition training, a lot of mindset stuff as well. So like in our coaching groups, there's a lot of sort of psychology-based approach in terms of how we do things, how we implement habits with people, and just the whole thing is a package. People might see me like strength training and powerlifting like you, and they just think that that's kind of like what I do. But it's funny because it's probably a bit like you. Like I love that and I do that myself. But a lot of our clients aren't even really into that. They're just more into like optimal health and well-being. So, and some of them are curious about it. But so yeah, man, it was just more than anything just about bringing that to the table in terms of having a safe place for people to learn, and doing what we love, doing what we love online so we can reach people, so we can help other vegans to become really strong walking billboards for this lifestyle, through their health and fitness, and the way that they carry themselves, that then they can spread the message with other people as well. And it's just like a ripple effect. From there, it just grows. So, yeah, that's pretty much, how it sort of began in summary. So yeah.
Yeah, and you can check the description box below, and I will post links to all of Fraser's social media places, any place you can find him, any kind of services is all for. I'll make sure it goes in there, and then at the end, Fraser will give you more details about each whatever wherever they're at. But kind of moving on, how long have you been training? How did you get into fitness and that kind of thing?
It's funny, man. I've been training for about 10 years, maybe 11 years now. Actually, probably going on 12 to be honest. But the last, I would say, 4 years has been like more serious. So you know what it's like. You sort of get into training, and for me, it was an outlet. I came from in my teens, in my early teens through to my early 20s, really mentally ill. Like I had so much mental illness, it was insane. I was clinically diagnosed with bipolar disorder, severe social anxiety, for a long time just deep, deep depression, which is obviously coincides with bipolar disorder as well, like manic and then depressive, and a learning disability, so ADHD. And I was like heavily medicated, and I was eating I had a really bad diet. I drank a lot during the weekends and stuff, and I was hanging around a pretty bad crowd of people as well. So they weren't bad per se, but they were just like me. Like they were just fueling that same mindset, that same kind of like environment, and I was just part of that. And to break away from that and really reinvent myself and get myself out of that nightmare, I had to step back and start something new. Um, and gym training
How old were you
was
at this time?
it was from the age of like 12 through to about 21 or 22.
Okay, and how old are you now?
32.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had to step away from that environment and that culture, and I had to find something to fill that void with. You know, it's one of the things like with people who are addicted or have bad habits is that they step away from it, but they don't fill it with anything productive or anything that adds like some meaning or value to them. So by not doing that, they often just go back to the old habits. And so and that's how I got into gym training. You know, I can't even remember how I started it, and to begin with, like, I think it might have been one of my friends just kind of dragged me along. And I just started off and like, I didn't know anything. Like, I didn't squat, I didn't deadlift, I didn't do any compound lifts, I just did machines and arms.
Yeah, in that bro session.
Yeah, and I did that, and I just I started to feel better first. You know, I started to notice a real change in my mindset and just in my energy levels. And as I started to get more and more in shape, that started to kind of give me confidence to overcome my anxiety to some extent. And then as I started to see more results, I started to, you know, get cleaner with my diet and improve my diet more and more as well. And from there, it was just like a series of like evolutions and steps, you know, from, you know, learning those things, learning more, implementing it, and until this day now where I've only been sort of lifting like real heavy and powerlifting style training for probably the last 2 or 3 years. But I love it now, you know, and I feel like I'm curious just to know where I'll go from here, you know. So it's been a long, ongoing process, put it that way.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah.
So you built more of like a base, you know, a kind of more. Did you do more? Would you say it's more traditional bodybuilding style training, or?
It's weird. It's like a power bodybuilding hybrid. So it's like the core of my training is probably like powerlifting. So it's like bench press, overhead press, squats, deadlifts, and I do, you know, weighted pull-ups and things like that. That's like kind of like the foundation. But then I'll add in like bodybuilding style accessory stuff in and around that. So I always have those like big compound lifts as like the base.
Yeah.
Because I can't not do that, right? It's like I can't not go into the gym and like not squat or deadlift on a leg day. But I'll add in like isolation work and drop sets and supersets and time under tension and all the bodybuilding stuff as like sort of like a periphery to that, to kind of give it that weird twist on bodybuilding where you have some degree of strength, but you also have some degree of like muscle hypertrophy as well.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. People sometimes I do pull ups or chin ups and stuff like that every time. And people are like, you do that to like build up your back for the deadlift. I'm like, nah, man, I want huge pipes. I just, you know, I want to get some huge guns. That's why I do that.
Yeah. That's it, man. It's like half the movement of getting up there is just bicep activation.
All right, now you're originally from New Zealand. How did you come to be in the United States?
Well, it's a weird story. My wife Lauren, who you know, who also, you know, moderates the Plant Strong group and is the other half of Evolving Alpha, she was here in Louisiana and I was in New Zealand, and we were in some of the same fitness mastermind groups on Facebook, and we just happened to start talking. And this was like this was like right before the era of like, what are some of those like dating sites now called?
I know eHarmony. I've heard of that one.
Yeah, like this was like right before that kind of became normalized and sort of more mainstream. So it was still right on the fringe of being like normal, you know. And we started talking. We talked for almost a year. And, you know, via Skype, and just really got to know each other on a deeper level. And that's a cool thing. When you have distance like that between you, there's no physical interaction. So you have to get to know someone on like a deep mental level. So we know more about each other in terms of like mental depth than what, like if we just met on the street or met at a party or something, or met at the gym, like it probably wouldn't have been the same. And the day came where I was just like, man, like if I don't like get on the plane and at least just come over and see what this could be, I know that like one day I'll look back and I'll regret it. You know, I'll be like, why didn't I just take the risk? You know, there's so many risks in life, and we're always so kind of cautious to like jump out because there's so many fears of like, what if? And it's like, and that kind of holds people stuck. And one day, man, I got the money together and I packed my bags, and I did have a return ticket, so I was scheduled to come back for the 3 month period that you can be here as a tourist. And I came over, and within the first week, man, it was just like we just clicked. You know, it was like what it was when we were talking on social media or on Skype and stuff. It was the same, and I was like, we have to figure out how we can, you know, make this work. And so from there, we adjusted my status through attorneys to then file for a 2 year period where you go through like a temporary green card, and then you go through another period where you go through like a permanent green card process, and then you go through another period, which I still have to do, which is then citizenship. So dual citizenship, basically, so both. So yeah, man, it hasn't been an easy ride in terms of like going through the immigration process, just because it's very stringent and time consuming and slow. But man, I wouldn't change it for the world, man. You know, it's just one of those things. I feel like it reminds me, like me doing this, it reminds me that if I feel scared about something, I should probably do it. You know, and coming from a place where I had like severe social anxiety, to get on a plane and you know, come over here and just leave my family, leave everyone behind, it was a big step.
What did your family think of that?
They were supportive because I explained it to them. I showed them how we kind of interacted. They knew by that time that I kind of had really evolved as a person anyway. I walked away from my old life a long time ago, so it wasn't like some sort of like drunken impulse. It was, you know, it was like more. It was calculated and it was thought out, and it was really I don't even know the word to describe it, man. It was liberating. You know, getting to a place where I realized that, hey, sometimes the best things in our lives often seem and look like the biggest risks. And it's just about doing it. And what I say to people is like, and I remind myself of this, is look, if I do it and it works out, great, good. If I do it and it doesn't work out, I learn from it, and that's still good. So either way, I reframe it in a way that it's a positive experience.
Yeah, I think about 10% of the viewers that I have are female, and right about the time you got to where you're coming over here and you're just going out on a limb, they all have their tissues. They're like, "Oh my God, that's so sweet."
Yeah, it was, you know, I just felt like it was something that, you know, I wanted to do, man. And
okay, hold on. Now, you spent a year where you only talked on Skype. Now, tell the truth. Every time were you like doing a bunch of push-ups and trying to? The only thing you see is your shoulders.
Maybe just for the first like few videos, and then after that, I was like, maybe she likes me for my personality now. You know.
No, I've been married for how long have we been married? 15 years. I've been married for 15 years.
Wow.
And no, if we were doing calls on Skype, I would still be doing the push-ups.
I love that, dude. I love it.
Okay, so how long have you been married? How long?
I'm about 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah, so 5 years this June. So I've been here for almost I will have been living in the States 5 years in March. So
how different is the United States compared to living in New Zealand?
It's very different, man. Very different. It was like, especially coming to the South. You know, like if I went, say, like moved to Los Angeles or something like that, or San Diego, where I'm from, Auckland, is more like sort of San Diego. So it's like me moving from San Diego to the dirty South. The people here have been really accommodating, though. That's one thing that I did notice, is that, you know, there is kind of the stigma with the South that they're very kind of introverted and they don't like outsiders per se, but I've noticed that with myself, like people have been really curious about where I'm from, like the culture there, and so they've really shown me that love and that sort of welcomeness. I think there's a big difference in terms of just like overall like nutrition and health. there's a really big difference. I think in terms of physical activity, especially in the South, like it's different in different places in the US. Like down here, people don't run and cycle and walk their dogs around the streets. They just don't. It's like there's the road and then there's the ditch, and you have no foot sidewalks anymore. And I think part of it is just the humidity is so high. People are just like, they don't want to go out in the high humidity. I don't know what it is. But then back in New Zealand, there's sidewalks everywhere. People are running with their dogs. People are out walking and running everywhere. Like, it's a very active culture. You don't see the sort of obesity and overweight tendencies there that you see here. I also noticed like a massive accessibility in terms of the type of food that people have here. Like, it's so easy to get a lot of really cheap bad food. Whereas in New Zealand, you can still get bad food, it's just not as cheap. And because of that, it's kind of not as abundant. But it is a different culture, man. It's a different, in a funny way, like when Lauren went back, she made a really good observation that I noticed, is that New Zealand seems to be like 10 or 15 years behind the US in terms of like their infrastructure and their systems. So like we don't have interstates. We just have like little highways and roads. We don't have big shopping like conglomerates like Walmart and Sam's Club and things like that. We have like little private stores. So it's like your private baker and your private produce store and things like that. So everything is still kind of privatized. It hasn't been kind of taken over by like big corporations yet. And all the sort of the family businesses haven't been pushed out yet. So it's really interesting when you go there, you'll notice that it's like what maybe the US in certain parts, especially in the South, was probably like 10 or 15 years ago. So it's kind of like behind in a way, which is kind of weird, kind of cool, just an observation, So yeah.
Now, as far as like your nutrition goes,
yeah,
how different? Well, actually, I'm sorry. I had one other thing I wanted to ask about the differences between New Zealand and the United States, but that was training. Like, you started lifting in New Zealand. You kind of following more of maybe more of a bodybuilding kind of approach there.
Yeah.
You've changed a little bit since you've been here, but if you compare the two communities, like the strength community, if we're kind of breaking that down, looking specifically at that, how would you compare that group? Because you kind of mentioned that geographically the United States is very different from region to region, but what about the strength community? Like how is that different?
I definitely feel like there's a way more prominent strength community in the US. I think New Zealand is still kind of catching up to that, and you can see it with just like top level competitors. Most of them, you don't see a lot of New Zealanders.
Isn't Brett Gibbs from New Zealand? He's a 74 kilo or something like that lifter in the IPF.
I don't know. Possibly either that or Australia.
Yeah, he's one of the top. No, he's definitely New Zealand. He's one of the top competitors in powerlifting. So.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think that it's definitely more niche. Like it's smaller, but everything in a sense is kind of shrunken down. So in New Zealand you have a population of like 5 million people. So everything is on a microscopic level. But even just being around here in this area that we are, there's definitely a lot more of like a powerlifting, strength training mentality. There's a lot of gyms popping up now around where we are that are like really powerlifting, strength based. And I wanted to actually probably train at one, but there wasn't enough sort of other machines there that Lauren was happy with. She wanted her other stuff there, lots of cable machines and stuff as well, which I do use too. So we were kind of tossing up between the two, but definitely like a more solid, like deep strength community in the US. But I think it's part and parcel with the larger population as well.
All right, well, I mean, I really like all that. We could probably sit and talk about that all day long, but I think a lot of my subscribers are really, they really are more interested in nutrition. So
I think most people love that, or they're interested in it anyway.
So kind of moving on to that, just kind of in general, without getting too specific quite yet, how do you approach nutrition in general? I mean, I kind of have a pretty good idea, but just for people
Yeah.
that,
Pretty much the way I approach it is different for everyone. I try not to pigeonhole myself into like one paradigm. You know, as I know that you know, like especially within veganism, it's like you get into veganism and then there's like a whole lot of subcultures of different like
yeah,
eating cliques. And it's like, you know, there's Michael Greger's crew, there's McDougal's crew, there's 80-10-10, there's all these different like paradigms, and I don't adopt any of them. Like I say, like what can I take from this piece? What can I take from this piece? What can I take from all of the different ones? And kind of fit it together like a puzzle, and test it on myself to find what works for me. And what I do is I'll look at different things and I'll figure out, where can that fit in my plan or where can that fit in my eating routine? I'll test it. I'll see how I feel in terms of like my digestion, my strength, my recovery, my cognition, like my focus. You know, all those biofeedback cues. And then based on that, I'll decide whether to keep it in or not. For the most part, it's mostly whole plant-based foods. So I would say probably like 80 to 90% of it's like whole plant-based foods. But then there's like 10% that's kind of like just like vegan junk food and stuff. Like, you know, I'm not one of those people who's like going to, it's just not my thing. Like maybe that would be eventually. I never kind of rule anything out, but for the most part, and it also depends on my goal. Like if my goal is just like sheer strength, the ratio of like vegan junk food tends to go up a little bit. But if my focus is like in terms of like cognition, fat loss, just like sheer performance, the ratio of like whole foods definitely goes up more and more. Um, I would say that it varies in terms of like my macros, but it's like it can vary from like 40 to 50% carbohydrates, maybe even a little bit more. And the remainder is usually like fat and protein. But everything shifts. Like, dude, like I'm not one of those people who kind of get stuck on like one macro breakdown. Like it depends. Like if I'm training, is it a rest day? Am I really trying to train like really hard? Like it depends what's happening with the training, like with my business and stuff. That really dictates how I adjust my nutrition to try and optimize whatever my thing is I want to optimize for that particular day. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I've had people ask me about, you know, kind of my diet, and usually I
Yeah.
just tell them what I ate that particular day, because they're vegan.
Yeah.
And I tell one person, like my friend Scott Shetler did an interview with me, and he was asking, you know, kind of tell us a little about your diet, and I told him, he's like, yeah, that's a lot of carbs. And
Yeah.
then, you know, I tell somebody else, and because my YouTube name used to be Carved Up Vegan Muscle, but
I remember that. I remember. Yeah.
somebody else, you know, they asked me like maybe one of the 80-10-10 people or the really low fat like plant based people. They like ask me what I'm eating. I tell them like, God, you follow a high fat diet, don't you? And like,
Yeah. Everyone has
but
this
yes,
weird perspective, man. It's like everyone's perspective is just subjected to themselves. Some people might think you're high carb, other people think you're high fat. It's like, you know?
when I initially started my channel back in 2011, I started lifting in around 2012. It it really like the community at that point in general, like the online YouTube community, was very kind of low carb. Like they were really pushing the low carb diets at that time.
Mm.
So I mean, my thing was just that I wanted to promote carbohydrates because these aren't
Yeah.
bad foods. You should eat these. These are, you know, healthy. There's rice,
Yeah.
potatoes,
Yeah.
fruit, corn. And since then, I think it's kind of changed. The if it fits your macros became a
Yeah.
lot more popular. So people kind of started to get the idea, and just like the carved up vegan muscle wasn't quite as necessary to promote.
Yeah.
It wasn't as relevant at that point, but
Yeah.
so yeah, I really appreciate that. Now, one aspect of your nutrition that obviously makes a big impact is that you're a vegan.
Yeah.
How did you get into that? How did that come about?
It was just another part of the evolution, man. You know, I don't know if you know, but I used to be a butcher. Um,
Oh, I do remember that. I had
yeah,
forgotten. Yeah.
yeah. And that was like right in the height of my mental illness as well. So like from the age of about 16, because I worked part-time after school. So from the age of about 16 through to like 21, I was a butcher. And then I worked there full-time for like 4 years in multiple butcheries. And I was really like just in a bad place mentally. And so my diet was terrible then. And it was just a series of evolutions from that point. So it was like, getting in the gym, getting out of that job. I actually went and did I was third year law and psychology degree at the Auckland University of Auckland. And my anxiety was so bad that I just stopped. Like I couldn't even finish it. And that's when I really was struggling at a point, like right after that, because I was like, there was almost like a void. And that's when I started to get into fitness. So that's when I started to study nutrition and human structure and function and stuff like that. And so my diet progressively kind of cleaned up, but I was still consuming animal products and things. And I'm just a curious person. So like I'm always open minded, and I'm never someone who's going to say, well, we've always done it this way, so we should just keep doing it that way, or that's just not for me. Without like trying, like without actually experiencing it and testing it on myself, and finding really good motivations to do it. But when I started to do it, it was just one of those things where it was fun. Like I found it was like kind of like you said when you had your carved up vegan muscle thing. Like for me, like embracing veganism was like it was like a challenge. It was like making a statement. Like I was like, I'm going to show people that this can work just because I want to. Just because like I believe in this movement. I love what it's about, and I want to prove people not wrong, but I want to prove myself right, and I want to prove everyone around me right that they can do this too. Um, it was an adjustment in terms of how I ate. It was really a shift because it's funny, dude. Like I know a lot of people when they're not vegan, they don't consume a lot of fruit. They really stay away from like the stuff that we eat like on a daily basis, like rice, beans, lentils, chickpeas, fruit. Those things are like a rarity for people who are like paleo or like if it fits your macros. Maybe if it fits your macros is slightly more, but paleo people like they avoid those things. And I was like, I like from a I do it for an ethical perspective to begin with, but then aside from that, there was the nutritional aspect. Like I want to feel better. There's so much good evidence out there to support this, and from an environmental perspective as well. I was like, there's so many good reasons, and more than anything, it was like a series of trial and error. So I was like playing around with different things, like did I get bloating from certain foods? Do certain foods sit with me well? What foods can I tolerate? What can I not tolerate? Testing it on myself, just letting go of a lot of the protein anxiety that I think a lot of people have. Like, don't get me wrong, and it's like like protein still matters. Like all the stuff matters, but it's just overstated. And I feel like when I let go of that and I started focusing on eating for optimal performance over just like just macros alone, then I started to like sleep better. I felt better. I recovered quicker. My strength went up because I was sleeping better. There was so many things that kind of came together, and I was like, "Oh my god, man! Like, why didn't I? Why didn't I wish that I was like born like this? I wish that like my parents could have raised me this way, because it would have been so liberating and such a cool thing." But in terms of how I eat, like I'm pretty supplement minimalist to some extent. It's like obviously like with blood work and things, like I would troubleshoot things with my diet first if I could. Like I'll take sublingual vitamin B12 sometimes and things like that, and I get my blood work done every 6 months. But I'll take some BCAAs while I train. And then I'll usually do like one serving of protein powder post workout with my smoothie. To be honest with you, it's more for the taste than the actual protein content, but it's just to get that leucine bump as well. But I don't stress about the details, man. Like I'm one of these people. Like, I don't get kind of entangled in too much of the details. I do it very instinctively, and I have fun with it. And I don't kind of get stressed over this the minutia per se, you know. And I feel like that in itself is like a huge component of you actually like achieving optimal health and optimal mental health as well.
Now, what specifically was it? Was there like a certain event or something that happened, something you saw that like kind
Yeah.
of made you say like, I can't be a butcher anymore. I'm just, or was it just being a butcher?
It was like both. So part of it was I was in. We had to make a trip to a slaughterhouse, and being a butcher, I'd never been in a slaughterhouse before. So I would get the carcasses, whatever you want to call them. I would get them once they were already like refrigerated. They had no head, they had no skin. They almost didn't look like an animal. And so there was a sense of like detachment there. Like it was easy for me to detach from that. But when I went to the slaughterhouse and I actually saw the animals like in the pens, and then I saw the process of them being killed, that was pretty traumatic. Um, I was like, I just could see the fear in their face, and I was like, holy crap! Like it was brutal, man. It was like really brutal. Um, and that incident, I can remember that incident vividly today. And just being in that environment, in a butchery environment, man, like the people in there, I noticed were a lot of them were mentally ill as well. Most of them had drinking problems or drug problems. They were abusive people. And just being in that environment was really, really proliferating whatever illnesses I had. Um, I would get up in the morning and I would cry before I had to go to work
Oh
because
man.
it was so bad. Like it was so depressing, and I was so fearful of just being like harassed all day by these older guys that I would cry before I had to even get up out of bed. And that's when I just really knew like I had to change something. And stepping away from that environment and getting out of that, it really made me realize how toxic it is. And I don't know if it's, I've often thought about this. I don't know if it's the butchery itself and being involved in that industry that makes people really toxic and mentally ill, or if it attracts those types of people, or both. If there's a degree of both, I think there's definitely a component of both. I think you have to be kind of disturbed to want to work in a place like that to begin with, and actually like not quit. Because it's rough. It's a brutal job. It's not hospitable. But then it definitely proliferates the illnesses and things. So that for me was like a huge turning point to get out of there and then pursue more fitness. Originally it was to pursue more academic stuff, and then through that I still was learning. And that's when I started to kind of get onto fitness and health, um, as like a third tier. So it was butchery, more academic stuff like psychology, law, and then it was fitness, nutrition, and health. So it was kind of like in stages, if that makes sense. It was just a series of transcendence, basically.
Yeah, and I think I kind of went through. I mean, I wasn't a butcher. I went through a kind of a similar. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, kind of wrapping it up. We're about 35 minutes in now. I should have timed the questions. We got in this like really kind of emotional.
You can clip it as much as you want, man.
Now I'll probably just cut out a little bit at the beginning there when we were talking.
Cool.
But just kind of to close off, why don't you tell people where they can find you? If people, you do some online personal training, you
Yeah.
got some online kind of nutrition guidance and that kind of thing. If
Yeah.
people are wanting to get a hold of you, if they just want to follow you somewhere, is there different places they could do that?
I would say the first thing is to request to join the Plant Strong Fitness group. We have our fan page, it's called Evolving Alpha, formerly Plant Strong Fitness. But if you want to get like in contact with all of us, including yourself and everyone else, to kind of get involved, whether you're curious or you're already vegan and you're just trying to learn more and stuff, the Plant Strong Fitness group is the place I think that the most action happens. From there, you know, we have our Evolving Alpha fan page and Evolving Alpha on Instagram as well. And we just have our website, which is www.evolvingalpha.com. But I would say, man, like the fan page, or the group, I should say, is really where it's at. Like, that's where the most interaction happens. That's probably where I put most of my time, and just trying to help people as much as I can. So that's really where you can find us. And I want to thank you, man, for having me on here. You know, it's always an honor and a pleasure to talk with other vegans who want to share the word and get this type of content out to people.
All right, thanks, man. Don't go anywhere just yet.
Cool.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. Go check out Fraser and Lauren and the whole crew at Plant Strong Fitness. Buy anything that they're selling. Just don't even question it. Just buy it. Just give him your money, whatever.
Yeah, thank you, man.
And you guys, I'll talk to you in the next video.